With football season upon us now, there's a lot happening in the news, so be sure to subscribe to my other channel, JG9 News, where I give you up-to-the-minute updates on everything happening in the NFL in a completely relaxed, unscripted format, and I give my thoughts on everything taking place around the National Football League today. And now, on with our feature presentation. The 1986 Oklahoma Sooners were an unbelievable football team. I know they didn't win it all, and they ended the year as the number 3 team in the AP poll, but you can make a legitimate argument that the 1986 squad was Barry Switzer's best squad that he had while coaching the program. Coming off of a national championship against Penn State the previous year in 1985 after winning the Orange Bowl, Oklahoma showed absolutely no signs of slowing down throughout 1986. There are far too many stats to show off how great they were, but here's just a brief sampling of everything. The Sooners ended the season by scoring a whopping 466 points, or 38.8 points per game. This was the best total in all of college football. Their defense was just as good, as they ended the season by allowing just 73 points, or 6.1 points per game. This was the best total in all of college football. Oklahoma's point differential over the course of the 12-game season was an astonishing plus 393, meaning that the average result of their games was Oklahoma winning by 33 points, or 5 possessions. If Oklahoma won a game 35-3, their average margin would go down. On 5 separate occasions, Oklahoma shut out their opponent, and on 3 separate occasions, they scored more than 60 points. And in their 3 wins against top 10 opponents, the Sooners outscored their opposition by a combined score of 100-28. Again, I know they didn't win it all, but if you said that 1986 Oklahoma was one of the greatest college football teams of all time, I wouldn't fight it at all, because outside of one loss to an incredible Miami team that ended the season ranked number 2 in the AP poll, to say that Oklahoma was dominant and was playing on another level would be putting it lightly. How dominant was Oklahoma in 1986? Well, they were beating teams by so many points that head coach Barry Switzer had to apologize afterwards. Seriously, there was one game where Oklahoma laid such a beat down on their opponent that Switzer felt terrible about it and issued an apology, saying that in no way whatsoever did he want that to happen and that he didn't intend it to happen at all. Because during Oklahoma's second game of the season, a battle at home against Minnesota, that's exactly what happened. And we're going to take a deep dive into that today. Because this is the story behind the beatdown that was so bad that an apology had to be issued afterwards. Before I talk about the apology and the actual game in question, as in this game right here, we need some context to understand the importance of the game. It's September 20th, 1986, and we find ourselves down in Norman for this non-conference matchup between the Oklahoma Sooners out of the Big 8 and the Minnesota Golden Gophers out of the Big 10. Oklahoma is the number 1 team in the country, and it's not too hard to see why. Not only were they the defending national champions from 1985, but in their first game against a number 4 ranked UCLA team that just won the Rose Bowl the previous season, they picked up right where they left off and just destroyed them 38-3. Next up for Oklahoma as they look to extend their 8-game winning streak dating back to last year was a home game against the Minnesota team that, at least on paper, seemed to be alright. Yes, they lost their head coach from 1985, as Lou Holtz left to take the job at Notre Dame, meaning that John Gutekunst, who was the defensive coordinator for the Golden Gophers under Holtz, was now the head coach of the team. However, not only did Minnesota make a bowl game and win a bowl game the previous year, but they just destroyed Bowling Green in their first game of the 1986 season, winning that one 31-7. Was anyone expecting Minnesota to win this game and pull off the upset over Oklahoma? No, as Minnesota was a 27-point underdog for a reason. But don't get it twisted. Minnesota was expected to be a good team in 1986, and they seemed like a worthy opponent, especially considering the fact that when the two teams met in 1985, Oklahoma won a close one, taking it 13-7. This could be another one of those close matchups on the second leg of the home and home. However, as you could probably guess by the highlights of the game that you've been watching this entire time, yeah, that did not happen. Not in the slightest bit. Because when all was said and done, the Oklahoma Sooners not only ended up defeating the Minnesota Golden Gophers, but they ended up destroying them to the point of sending them to the Shadow Realm. as Oklahoma won this one by a final score of 63-0, giving Oklahoma its largest win since they defeated Kansas State by that same scoreline in 1974. Let's just throw some stats out there to show how much of a bloodbath this game was, because I'm not even sure there's a word in the English language that truly exhibits how awful this game was. The Gophers crossed midfield just one time the entire contest, and that was after recovering an Oklahoma fumble. So if we're talking actual drives that started in their own territory, where they had to physically cross the 50, the Gophers did not do that once. Oklahoma had 25 first downs compared to just 10 for Minnesota, meaning that for every 2 first downs that the Gophers got, the Sooners got 5. Oklahoma got a whopping 458 rushing yards compared to 49 for Minnesota, meaning that for every 1 rushing yard that Minnesota got, Oklahoma got somewhere around 9.5. Minnesota ran the ball 39 times to get those 49 yards, meaning that the Gophers averaged an abysmal 1.2 yards per carry. Oklahoma, meanwhile, was averaging over 6.5 yards per carry, and just ran the ball down Minnesota's throat by running it 70 times and dominating the time of possession. Minnesota had to punt the ball away 9 times, giving Oklahoma plenty of chances to score, which they absolutely did, seeing as the Sooners scored at least 14 points in every quarter of the game. And from a total yardage standpoint, when all was said and done, the Gophers had just 146 yards compared to 523 for the Sooners. If there's a game where one team is leading 523 to 146 in total yardage, you can take a wild guess as to how that game went. And this one was no exception whatsoever, because everything about this game for Minnesota was ugly with a capital U. However, there was one person who was somewhat upset about Oklahoma's performance, and amazingly enough, that was none other than head coach Barry Switzer, because he felt so guilty after the performance. A 63-0 win? We won by 63 points? That's running up the score, and I can't believe that just happened. Now, you can make the argument that in college football, there is no such thing as running up the score. Number one, we're not dealing with kids. We're dealing with people who are of legal age, and people who are getting paid in the form of scholarships to play. So the mantra of, if you don't want me to score on you, then stop me, could absolutely apply. Number two, especially in college football, where margin of victory is so important, where a lot of pollsters only look at the box score, and where how impressive you look actually matters, because a good win-loss record isn't the only thing that matters, you need to win by a lot of points, and there is no such thing as running up the score. It's not like the NFL where a 24-10 win counts the same as a 34-10 win. In college football, those extra 10 points could actually make a difference. But whether or not you do think there's a thing as running up the score, Barry Switzer thought that there was, especially when it came to this game we've been watching this entire time. Obviously, you can't order your guys not to score, but Switzer did just about everything you could do in this situation with the game having comfortably been decided. Oklahoma had 79 plays on offense, and they ran the ball on 70 of them, meaning that roughly 89% of all the plays that the Sooners called were running plays. The plan was to just run the ball and get out of there and get the game over with. And just about everyone on the team ended up playing in this game, with one of the touchdowns even being scored by Ron Counter, a reserve running back who was a walk-on. By the end of the game, if you had a pulse and you lived within 5 miles of campus and you had college eligibility remaining, odds are you were suiting up for Oklahoma in the second half. And even with the backups in the game, including the walk-ons and the guys who never thought they'd ever see the field in a real game, and even calling nothing but runs, Oklahoma was still able to put up 63 points and shut out the Gophers. And after the game, Barry Switzer immediately met with Minnesota's head coach John Gutekunst and sprinted over to midfield to greet him and tell him that this was not how it was supposed to go at all, especially considering that this was the first real test for Gutekunst, and this was his first real impression in the eyes of many as the head coach of the program. A 63-0 humiliation. Switzer spent the entire time with Gutekunst profusely apologizing, just saying to the coach the entire time, "I'm so sorry." It was a very similar situation to what happened in 1976 in an NFL game between the Denver Broncos and the New York Jets, where the Broncos won by a final score of 46-3 and just decimated the Jets. And after the game, head coach John Ralston apologized to Lou Holtz for beating them by that much, which you can learn more about by clicking the card in the upper right corner. That's 2 Lou Holtz references in a video that's not even about Holtz. I don't know how that happened, but it's a small world. As for what Coach Gutekunst said for the Gophers, what are you talking about? You didn't run up the score. You have nothing to apologize for. You whooped our butts fair and square. Gutekunst said, no, we did it. We did it. In other words, we didn't stop you guys. That's not your fault. You did everything you could to not run it up, and you did what you were supposed to do. We just didn't execute. That's not on you at all. In fact, Barry Switzer's pity for winning by too much got to a point where even Coach Gutekunst from Minnesota had to do some damage control in the press conferences afterwards to assure everyone that Switzer did not run up the score, and that this was totally fine. Said Gutekunst, Oklahoma played 80 players. I'm satisfied they didn't try to run up the score. There you have it. Gutekunst said that it wasn't running up the score, said that Switzer did everything right, and that Oklahoma did not try to rub salt in the wounds of Minnesota. So you can all get off of Switzer's back if you're criticizing him and his team for running it up. Always a good sign after the game when the coach that just lost by 63 has to do damage control for the winning team to assure the world that this wasn't poor sportsmanship or anything along those lines. Showed you just how well this game right here went for Minnesota. And it's not as though Minnesota was a bad team. Not only would they make it to a bowl game, but 2 months after this embarrassment against Oklahoma, they would upset number 2 ranked Michigan and would give them their first loss of the season, delivering a national championship blow to the previously 9-0 team. Oklahoma was just that good on this day. In fact, in the eyes of Barry Switzer, they were too good. Whether you think there is such a thing as running up the score in college football or not at the top level is up to you. However, I think we can all agree that if you put in all the backups and just run the ball on every play, you're doing everything possible short of just taking a knee on every play to not run up the score. And even though some people in the media may not have recognized that, and even though Barry Switzer himself may not have recognized that, at least the losing head coach, Minnesota's John Gutekunst, did recognize that, and fell on the grenade for Barry Switzer by telling the world that his game plan wasn't anything remotely resembling running up the score. To this date, this is the last time that Minnesota and Oklahoma have played each other in a football game, and whenever they'll play again, however far away that may be, I'm fairly confident that the matchup won't end up 63-0 like this one. But to answer the question, how good was Oklahoma in 1986? They were so good that they had to apologize for it. Get your official Jaguar Gear 9 merchandise by going to jj9shop.com, and be sure to like and subscribe, as it really helps the channel out a lot. Join me every Wednesday night where we'll play NFL Trivia for cash prizes at 9 p.m. Eastern over on Twitch. To learn more about the history of college football, subscribe to Jaguar Gator 8. To learn more about the history of Major League Baseball, subscribe to Jaguar Gator 7. Also, special thanks to all of our Patreon supporters for helping out the channel. Your support is greatly appreciated. See how you can become a patron and request future video topics in the description below.